Berserk is a series that works off of context and often leaves things unsaid, challenging its readers to piece together the larger picture by themselves. There are many questions that have been answered since the very first issue of Berserk came out in 1989, but some of our questions are still shrouded by the fog of mystery. Why does Skull Knight care about Guts' future? What is the grand design of the God Hand? Where do Guts and Griffith come from? And perhaps, most important of all, why is Schnoz the most powerful being in all of Berserk? Jokes aside, the first three questions we post here are legitimate queries that have remained unanswered for literal decades, and we thought we'd give you just a glimpse at a few more. These are the top 15 Berserk mysteries that need answers. Explore. Before we get into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Number 1. Who were Guts' parents? This is a question that has probably been in the back of every Berserk fan's mind ever since they read the first Golden Age chapter. Guts was born from a hanging corpse and raised by a mercenary and his concubine. He never even saw his birth mother and never knew his birth father, but it's clear that Guts' circumstance of birth holds some importance in his story because, on at least a couple of occasions, reference has been made to his lineage being linked to his inhuman survivability. The first time Guts met the Skull Knight, he was shocked that the foe of the Inhumans gave off a vibe quite similar to said Inhumans, but also that he seemed to know a lot about Guts himself. Specifically, Skull Knight referred to Guts' birth, claiming that because he was born from death lying in the mud, he had been more successful than most in evading the clenching jaws of death. Guts has never spoken about his time growing up, never mind the circumstances of his birth. The second occasion was also in the presence of the Skull Knight, but this time the connection was somewhat different. After rescuing Guts and Casca from the eclipse, SK brought the branded pair to Godot's cottage because the blacksmith's ore mine used to be an elfin dwelling, where one could ward off the malign spirits of the dead from Guts and Casca. Skull Knight was completely unaware of the relationship between Guts and Godot, and pointed out that there might have been a connection between the branded swordsman and the elves. Of course, we know that one of Guts' constant companions is the elf Puck, whose elf dust was incidentally used to cure him from his eclipse injuries. But here's the thing, elves rarely choose to show themselves to humans. They are much more content frolicking about under the guise of anonymity, causing mischief and then scurrying away. The fact that Guts was traveling with Puck during his third encounter with the Skull Knight piqued the interest of the foe of the Inhumans, because his previous claim of Guts being connected to the elves was now playing out in front of his eyes. But why is all this information relevant to Guts' parentage? Well, do you know the only other character to have had an elf with them for most of their journey in Berserk? That's right, Schierke. Ivalira and Schierke are about as inseparable as Guts and Dragonslayer, and we think that this relationship is what will help us understand the true origins of the Black Swordsman. Recall that in the first Golden Age chapter, Guts' mother wasn't the only woman who had been hung from that ghoulish tree. It bore around a dozen other bodies, and all of them were curiously garbed exactly the same, almost as if they were given prison uniforms before being executed. Or maybe they were dragged out of a secret coven of witches. Heresy and heretic hunting have been major themes in Berserk before, and it would not surprise us to find out that Guts' parents were inclined towards the magical. It would be extremely interesting if it were to come out that the branded swordsman was the son of a wizard or a witch, or both, because then the explanations become far easier and the possibilities for future plotlines become practically endless. Number 2. What is the God Hand's purpose? This is a question people have been asking since the Black Swordsman arc came out over 30 years ago. What exactly is the purpose of the God Hand? Ostensibly, their purpose is to tempt humans into becoming demons, and adding a member to the upper echelon of demon kind is something that they do every 216 years. They have the power to perform feats that can be looked at as a miracle or as a curse. It is the God Hand that guides and leads apostles in their endlessly self-serving existence, but to what end? That has never been made clear in Berserk. We know that Griffith's purpose is to achieve world domination, but why exactly do Slan, Ubik, Conrad, and Void care about that stuff? Sure, you can argue that the maxim by which demonkind functions is do what thou wilt, but then the God Hand clearly has structured plans with an end goal in mind. Otherwise, they wouldn't have orchestrated the incarnation ceremony. Neither would they have shown up in the physical world following the great roar of the astral world, which is exactly what they did when Femto sliced open Ganishka. So what is it that the God Hand wants? World domination? Global perversion? Pulling every last human into the abyss where they can finally be rid of their suffering and become one? The answer to this question will only be revealed once Berserk enters its final stages, but we'd like to hear your own thoughts on it in the comments section down below. But while the endgame for the overarching antagonists of the series remains shrouded in mystery, the backstory for the main antagonist is one that we feel no one is talking about enough. Number 3. Griffith's true lineage. This was the skipped chapter 83, so technically you can consider it to be non-canon, but who exactly were Griffith's parents? Why was this silver-haired pauper so interested in becoming king ever since he was a child? And what significance could it have on the overall story of Berserk? Well, the reason it's significant is because the idea of evil, the entity that drives every negative thought and action in Berserk, specifically mentioned that it had manipulated history and genetics to ensure Griffith's eclipse actually took place. The idea of evil stated that it created the proper context for Griffith's life to blossom the way it had, and that it was because of his influence that humans even had reasons for their negativity in the first place. The thing that really caught our eye in this breakdown, though, was the fact that the idea claimed it had controlled bloodlines through the centuries to ensure Griffith's birth. The symbol of the Holy See is a Falcon insignia with a double helix underneath, and incidentally enough, Griffith was known as the White Falcon before he became the guardian angel of longing. Could there be a relation between Griffith's lineage and one that was seemingly extinguished 1,000 years ago? When Princess Charlotte recounted the tale of Supreme King Gaiseric, she mentioned that Gaiseric had no children of his own, and yet the Midland royal family claimed descent from him. What if the true lineage of King Gaiseric actually ended up surviving through Griffith? He was called Guts' unkingly other half by the Skull Knight in their first encounter, after all, and we know that the Skull Knight thinks of his former life as a human as having been foolish. And if you've seen our origins video for the guy, you'll know exactly why he thinks that as well. But speaking of King Gaiseric, Number 4. How did Gaiseric's empire fall? Officially speaking, we do know how Gaiseric's empire fell. It was told to us in chapter 53 via the medium of the Skull King's fairy tale. In that fairy tale, it is said that once the Supreme King's empire reached a point where indulgence was the only thing anyone cared about, God smote him down. He sent his guardian angels to destroy Gaiseric's capital city, which now lies buried underneath the Tower of Rebirth in Wyndham. The number of angels sent to destroy the Emperor's folly differs according to sources. However, Judo recalls 5 angels being sent down to Earth, whereas Casca has only heard the version where 4 of them destroyed that imperial city. Even the events leading up to the destruction of Gaiseric's empire are shrouded in mystery. It makes sense that if he rose up as a continent-conquering emperor, that he would then drive people to their deaths, building grand structures and such, especially if he were an oppressive ruler. Gaiseric was known by many names, and one of them was the Knight of Galloping Death, given how powerful of a warrior he himself was. But that confusion as to the number of angels is very important here because it is the only indication that the God Hand was somehow involved in Gaiseric's downfall. Well, that and the fact that the bodies we saw buried at the bottom of the Tower of Rebirth in chapter 53 all bore the brand of sacrifice on their foreheads, which can only be received by a person through the Invocation of Doom. Chapter 362 softly confirmed this suspicion of ours by giving us a flashback to 1,000 years ago, and we could see just how depressing the state of Midland would have been immediately before it was wiped out. How things devolved to the point where the Supreme King's grand empire ended and the blindness preached by the Holy See began to rise, we don't know. And that's why we need another flashback to that era of the world. Understanding the reasons behind the fall of Gaiseric's empire could hold the key to defeating the Falcon of Light, because as Flora once said to the Skull Knight, time is not a line or a circle, it's a spiral. Every event happening in the current timeline parallels something that happened in the first timeline, and so if we can learn how that ended, we can predict how this one will end as well. But speaking of the Skull Knight, Number 5. Skull Knight and Void. With every passing volume, this mystery becomes a little less intriguing, especially because Miura-sensei was in the process of revealing their connection before his tragic demise. We say this because chapter 362, the penultimate chapter published in his lifetime, focused entirely on the final moments of the Skull Knight as a human. Before this chapter came out, fan speculation regarding a connection between Skull Knight and Void had been rampant. When the foe of the Inhumans breached the eclipse, he went straight for Void, and the look they shared for an instant spoke 1,000 words. Even prior to entering the interstice, SK mentioned that the presence of his eternal foe outside its infernal gates would have prompted Void to start spewing his causality spiel, indicating that their connection ran deeper than we'd even imagined. We believe that, for the most part, the identities of Skull Knight and Void have already been revealed in the manga. In chapter 138, while standing in the chapel of the Tower of Conviction, Father Mosgus recounts the tale of a certain sage that Supreme King Gaiseric had once imprisoned within these hallowed halls. The sage was captured for daring to defy the Supreme King's hedonism, and every day he spent in captivity, he proclaimed Gaiseric's sins to God, until one day his call was answered, and an angel was made to descend from the heavens to fulfill his greatest desire. Then, in chapters 361 and 362, we got the final moments of Skull Knight's human life, and wouldn't you know it, the last thing he saw before being consumed by the Berserker armor was the exposed brain of Void. We are almost certain that the Skull Knight is the Supreme King Gaiseric, and that Void is the aforementioned sage from Mosgus' story. But until we get another flashback confirming this dynamic, we cannot be entirely sure. And besides, what's more important is to answer the question, what was the relationship between these two? It's clear to most Berserk fans that Skull Knight and Void are basically the Guts and Griffith of their era, but what isn't clear is the circumstances that push them in that direction. With the announcement of Berserk's resumption from April 28th, this is one of the first things that we'd love to see get addressed. Number 6. Strugglers vs. Zod. Another thing we want to see addressed as soon as possible is the till death do us part dynamic that both the Strugglers of Berserk seem to share with Nosferatu Zod. The Immortal One was introduced in the second chapter of the official Berserk continuity, and has been one of its best antagonistic characters to date. His first showdown with Guts went overwhelmingly in Zod's favor, to the point he ended up sparing the swordsman not out of mercy, but because he had realized that Griffith was destined to become a godhand. Zod left Guts with a prophetic warning, claiming that a never-ending death would soon pay him a visit, and this is quite similar to the ominous declaration made by the Skull Knight to Guts in their first meeting. What made things even more interesting for us was the fact that Zod and Skull Knight didn't just know each other, they thought of each other as eternal rivals. When the Skull Knight arrived at the juncture of Griffith's eclipse, he was forced to cut his way through Zod, because that was how things had been between them for at least 300 years. Zod had evidently fought the Skull Knight at several temporal junctions, and in his mind, no one besides the Wandering Wraith fit his criteria of being the strongest. Zod is a being who exists solely for the thrill of the battle. He has fought both humans and apostles in his centuries-long existence, but only the Skull Knight had been strong enough to actually give him a challenge. That all changed when Guts survived the eclipse and transformed into the Black Swordsman, because now there were two who could claim equal footing as the Immortal One. Zod has fought both Guts and Skull Knight at least twice on the pages of Berserk, and each encounter was practically a stalemate. He won his first fight with Guts, was forced to retreat during the second, and their third encounter took place at a dying Elfhelm, so we're not really counting that as a proper fight. Zod lost his first on-page encounter with the Skull Knight, marveled at Guts' power within the Berserker armor during their second, and they haven't fought since Zod helped burn down Flora's Spirit Tree mansion. Round 3 is long overdue between the Strugglers and Zod, but how will it play out? The Immortal One seems to be tied to the Black Swordsman via causality. Before the Battle of Vritannis, Zod was given a prophecy by Sonia, who stated that a time would come where he would have to choose between fighting the blade that once cut his flesh or making it his own. This prophecy came true in Vritannis when Zod and Guts decided to team up to take down Ganishka's mist form. When it comes to the Skull Knight and Zod, they're bonded by the bloody links of battle. Zod thinks Skull Knight is his only true equal, and Skull Knight can't seem to get rid of Zod no matter where he goes. This triangle of blood and battle is building up to a bombastic blow-off in the final arc of Berserk, and we need to know who's coming out on top ASAP. Number 7. How will the real name of magical creatures come into play? In amongst all the madness of the battle against the sea god, you might have missed out on a crucial little detail provided by Ivalira to the newest member of the Black Swordsman party. When Isma jumped into the ocean to save Isidro, who'd been knocked overboard, she learned that all the stories her dad had told her about her mother were true. She'd heard voices in her head that urged her to speak her true name and assume her true form. And though we never get to see it, Isma does speak it because she transforms into a marrow, thus saving Isidro. When she comes on board and starts recounting what happened under the sea, Ivalira quickly shuts her up before she can give away her biggest secret. Apparently, every spirit creature in Berserk, elves, marrows, flower spirits, and more, have a name that they give to society and a true name that they keep to themselves. This true name is what allowed them to assume their proper released forms, but it was also a double-edged sword. If anyone other than the spirit themselves spoke their true name in their presence, then said spirit would become enslaved to their will. Ivalira quickly shoots down Yzma's suggestion of being okay with telling Guts & Co. her true name, mostly because she doesn't trust Isidro, but this is a vital piece of information that could come into play during the final stages of Berserk. For example, we still don't know Puck's true name, and the way Miura staged some of these scenes, it seems like that is going to matter quite a bit in Berserk's finale. So far, the matter of a spirit's true name has not been brought up again barring chapter 324, but don't think it's a dropped plot thread just yet. Miura-sensei had the uncanny ability to ensure that all character threads would be tied into the larger narrative, and that is sure to continue now with Kuji Mori at the helm. The true name of astral creatures is going to be important in the story down the line. We just don't know how or why yet. And speaking of things that have been set up but not explained yet, Number 8. Sonia and Schierke's tragic reunion. The Kite and the Owl at the Wharf is one of the cutest and saddest chapters in Berserk. Sonia and Schierke, two outcasts with no real family to speak of, connect with each other based off their unique lives. They end up having an entire adventure where they save Kushan kids from slavery, fight off a pirate crew, and even manage to get Mule and Isidro to become friends. Sort of. At the time of their parting, Sonia asked Schierke to join up with her, as she thought Schierke had nowhere else to go. The young mage declined, of course, and Sonia understood, but she left the owl with a prophecy. Sonia claimed that they would meet each other again someday. The mystery of this reunion is the circumstances under which it will take place. Since that meeting between Sonia and Schierke, a lot has happened. Ganishka has been defeated, Vritanis has been saved, heck, the whole world is now in a state of fantasia. While Sonia finds herself as the medium of the Falcon of Light, enjoying a high position in his court and council, Schierke is allied with a party that directly opposes Sonia's leader. Guts and Griffith have been on a warpath for a very long time now, and the Black Swordsman currently finds himself at a heavy disadvantage. He's lost his girl, his will to fight, and is being drawn into the whirlpool that swallowed Elfhelm whole. Schierke is trying to get to him, but she can't. Meanwhile, Sonia is in Falconia and is shocked to see that Griffith has returned with yet another woman that she thinks she's going to have to compete with. Both of them are completely unaware of the fact that they are fighting on opposing sides, and it will be very interesting to see the context under which their reunion takes place. Number 9. The First God Hand. This is a fairly recent mystery and one that has left plenty of Berserk fans scratching their heads in confusion. You see, during the Eclipse arc, we were told that a God Hand member is born once every 216 years, and that with Griffith, the cycle was complete. This would technically make the oldest member, whom we naturally assume to be Void, around 1,000 years old, and also the first member of the God Hand. But then, chapter 362 dropped, and while we learnt that our assumption about Void being the oldest God Hand was correct, we were proven horrifically wrong on the second front. Turns out, there was another God Hand that existed 1,000 years ago, or at least that's the impression that Void's godlike partners give off in their first and only appearance so far. It's hard to determine whether these 4 pagan-inspired entities are even God Hand members in the first place, because, number 1, the hand that represents the Hand of God in Berserk is missing from chapter 362, and number 2, these guys look decidedly inhuman. We're told that every member of the God Hand was once a human being, and while that is true for Void, is it true for the beings that flanked him 1,000 years ago? The 4 former God Hand members bear an uncanny resemblance with pagan gods from our own world. Miura was known to draw inspiration from mythologies and religions for his own creations. From left to right, the inspirations behind each of the former God Hand members seems to be Poseidon, the Lion of Ishtar, a Cycladian fertility deity, and Diana of Ephesus. Their inhuman, godlike designs could be an indicator of the times that Void and Skull Knight existed in. It has been said numerous times throughout the series that magic was a normal thing 1,000 years ago, and that Fantasia was the default setting for the world. Could these God Hand members be a primordial representation of evil? Are they even God Hand members in the first place? Because they seem to be standing atop the enclosed fist of God if you squint carefully at the panels where they show up in chapter 362, and God Fist just sounds like an attack name that Father Mozgus would have come up with had he been there. There is another theory in the Berserk fandom that says these 4 old God Hand members are actually the 4 elemental kings of the world, who are also rumored to have brought about the downfall of Gaiseric's empire. If that is true, then this makes things even more interesting and complicated, because according to Schierke, the 4 kings are supposed to be benevolent, loving creatures who are protectors of humanity, not beings that ally themselves with literal demons. The secret of the first God Hand is one that, as we said earlier, was introduced pretty recently to the story, but it has quickly become one of the most anticipated Berserk mysteries series ever. We're confident that we don't even need overt answers to this. We just need one more chapter like 362 and we'll be content with putting the pieces together ourselves. Number 10. How will the Bakiraka clan affect the story? When they were first revealed towards the tail end of chapter 55, we thought the Bakiraka clan was going to be nothing more than novelty filler characters. But as the story progressed, the Bakiraka clan became more and more relevant to the endgame that Kentaro Miura was setting up before his untimely demise. For those of you who don't know, the Bakiraka clan is a Kushan clan of assassins who use traditional Kushan weaponry to dispatch of targets at the highest level. They had been doing so for centuries, and were contracted by the King of Midland before being called upon by the Kushan Emperor Ganishka, who recognized their skills as trackers and killers. The reason this is important is because the Bakiraka clan are Kushan exiles, having been forced out of their mainland and homes generations ago for siding with the wrong side during an ancient power struggle. The reason why Salat worked so diligently for the Dread Emperor was not because he believed in Ganishka's vision, he just wanted to take his people home. But in his attempt to do so, he got caught up in a struggle that seemed to transcend the very concept of reason. Along came the Falcon of Light, who brought with him the destruction of Ganishka and the creation of Fantasia, and this was the moment where the relevancy of the Bakiraka skyrocketed, at least in our eyes. Before the great roar of the astral world, they were yet another secret assassin clan in a genre of fiction that is flooded with them. But after it, they became one of the only human beings who could stand their ground and hold on to their dwellings apart from the ones living in Falconia, which makes them sort of the last humans living outside of Griffith's sphere of influence. The Bakiraka live in a clandestine mountainous village, of course, and this place also happens to be the destination for a rather intriguing group of companions. And also, if war is the only natural outcome for the endgame of Berserk, then Guts is going to need an army of his own. And what better soldiers could you ask for than an entire clan of killers bred to sacrifice their enemies on the battlefield? The possibilities remain endless when it comes to how the Bakiraka clan, a seemingly minor part of Berserk, will end up influencing its finale. And we cannot wait to see them all play out. Number 11. What happened to those that were living on Elfhelm? After Griffith attacked the only actual safe haven for people and astral creatures in the world, a single question has been running through our minds. What happened to everyone from Elfhelm? See, the Falcon of Light showed up on Skellig Island unexpectedly, thanks to a connection we'll speak of in a few moments, and proceeded to immediately destroy the island. This wasn't anything new, because he ordered his men to do the same thing at Flora's Spirit Tree Mansion. But unlike that attack, one thing was very different this time. The denizens of Elfhelm vanished after their homeland was destroyed. And yes, we do mean this quite literally. At this moment, the only people who survived the attack were, well, people, and also Puck and Ivalira for some reason, but we think we know why they were able to remain with their respective people. See, the primary reason behind the disappearance of the magical creatures of Skellig Island is most likely the destruction of the Cherry Blossom Spirit Tree. That spirit tree tethered Elfhelm to Fantasia, and burning it meant severing that tie. The real question is, does their disappearance mean that these magical creatures are dead, or have they just become dormant in the astral world and will be brought back through some quirk of causality? Puck and Ivalira are magical creatures too, but they didn't become a fading animation effect when Elfhelm went down, possibly due to their strong ties with Guts, Isidro, and Schierke, and also the fact that they seem to be intrinsically tied into Berserk's endgame. Puck especially, because he's been with us since the Black Swordsman chapter, and we're about as invested in his fate as we are in Guts's at this point in time. But here's the caveat: if the astral world has merged with the physical world, doesn't that mean that the creatures of Elfhelm have nowhere left to manifest themselves? Because, logically speaking, once you merge two things, they then became an entity of their own which retains the properties of its base elements. Separating these two elements will never bring them back to their original state, and if this line of logic also applies to the global interstice that is Fantasia, then Griffith's uprooting the Cherry Blossom Spirit Tree is the equivalent of hitting delete permanently in the recycle bin. By removing the link, he removes the linked entirely, right? Well, that's what we hope to find out soon enough, because we're rooting for Isidro and Yzma, and it would actually piss us off if that doesn't end up happening. Number 12. Rickert. This should be a self-explanatory entry, which is why we've simply titled it Rickert. If we were going to be more pedantic about it, we'd have called it Chapter 337 from the Slaptasia arc, because we still haven't recovered from Ricky's righteous right hand of fury. But why is it that Rickert was able to slap Griffith, a God Hand member, when entire Kushan army units had failed to do so much as pierce his armor with their weapons? Well, this wouldn't be a mystery if we knew why, would it? There are a couple of theories that make Rickert pimp-slapping Griffith sensible. evil. Number 1. He is secretly the strongest entity in all of Berserk and is even more powerful than the idea of evil. And number 2, the fact that he moved on from the Band of the Falcon and now exists outside of Griffith's story. Berserk is a tale that takes intentions and emotions rather seriously. Dreams can have very real consequences on the real world, and something as small as inadvertently rescuing an elf can be layered into the lore as having been preordained by causality. In chapter 237, when the Skull Knight addresses Guts' journey towards Elfhelm, he explains that Griffith now is akin to the author of his own story. It's as if he's rewriting the very fabric of reality with his own convictions, and he casually mentions that only those outside his story can now affect him. Rickert did say that his leader was the White Falcon, Griffith, and not this new Falcon of Light right after pimp-slapping the respect out of him. So maybe that explains everything, but it still doesn't explain how this will be important to the story later. Currently, Rickert is escaping Falconia with a rather interesting group of companions. He's on a Garuda with Eric and Daiba and flying towards the secret Bakiraka clan mountain village alongside Salat and his Tapasa. Given the fact that Rickert built a mother-flippin' strapzooka in the Middle Age to keep Rakshas off his back, we can only wait to see with bated breath what his next genius creation might be, and the crucial role it might end up playing as Berserk enters its final stretch. But speaking of Falconia... Number 13. What is the purpose of the Falcon of Darkness and Falconia? When Miura pulled the trigger on the great roar of the astral world, the first thing that caught our eye was the world spiral tree, but the second thing was what sat underneath it, the absolutely massive city of Falconia. Griffith's fantastical capital city is the metropolis of all metropolises, complete with functional drains, paved streets, coliseums, pantheons, and so many boroughs. It has become the last safe haven for humanity, allegedly protected from evil spirits by the winged crystals surrounding its boundaries, and containing a supply of ever-replenishing harvests. By all measures, Falconia is a utopia where all living within it are content and safe from the horrors of Fantasia. But this is Berserk, and if you've been following this list properly, you know better than that by now. In chapter 345, it was confirmed that Falconia is actually the ancient capital of Supreme King Gaiseric, raised from the abyss and re-established in the physical world. You guys already know that the conditions under which that city was buried are already highly dubious, and so it immediately makes Falconia's perfect existence suspect. On paper, the official reason for Falconia's existence is to ensure Griffith's supremacy over the world remains unchallenged, because he can use the world spiral tree to fast travel basically anywhere he wants to, and as long as the tree stands tall, the world will remain in Fantasia. But what if the true reason goes beyond simply reigning over the sinful black sheep and the blind white sheep? In chapter 95, we are told of a prophecy passed down amongst Holy See higher-ups for generations. The revelations state that when the sun dies 5 times, a red lake will appear west to a city with a name both old and new. It's a sign that the 5th angel will alight. He is the Falcon of Darkness, the master of the sinful black sheep and the king of the blind white sheep, the one who shall call upon the world an age of darkness. If you followed Berserk with even 30% focus, you'll know that this prophecy perfectly fits the birth and incarnation of Femto into the physical world. Griffith is very clearly the Falcon of Darkness, and yet all of humanity insists that he represents the light. The prophetic dream of the Falcon of Light that was witnessed by all those disgruntled with their lives and looking for answers with God told them that Griffith was going to be their savior. But what if Griffith is just setting them up for a massive sacrifice instead? Falconia has already seen a massive eclipse-like ritual happen on its paved streets, if chapter 362 is to be believed, and with the number of humans that have been penned into it like so many pigs, who is to say that they aren't just being fattened for the slaughter? From the outside, Falconia looks like a beacon of safety and prosperity, but its purpose might just be as bloody and horrific as its foundations, as we were told they were all the way back in chapter 53. And when we finally do learn the purpose for Falconia's existence, you can bet your behind that it will be worse than anything that's happened so far in the story. Yes, even the horse thing. Number 14. What is the ultimate fate of the Black Swordsman Party? This might feel like an odd question to you, but it's a grave mystery to us. Guts has already lost a group of friends to Causality. When he was with the Band of the Falcon, Guts was more naive and less grounded, always rushing to the next thing and never appreciating what he had in the moment until it was too late. Time and again, he had given up on an irreplaceable thing just to realize his loss in a moment of weakness a lifetime later. It can be said that him abandoning the Band of the Falcon is what put him in this position today, as things could have been very different had he just stayed with Griffith. But that begs the question, What will happen to his new comrades? Guts didn't exactly create the Black Swordsman party, they just naturally gravitated towards it. Through their encounters and experiences together, Guts and co were able to forge a bond where they can actually trust one another and look out for each other. He's almost become their Griffith, and indeed, the Black Swordsman party does have people filling in the shoes of Guts' old crew. Flora once said that time is not a loop, it's a spiral. It is not a guarantee that what happened once will happen again in the exact same fashion, but that doesn't mean things won't play out similarly enough. The reason why we're so scared about the fate of the Black Swordsman party is because we know what happened to their predecessor. They became literal food for demon kind. Right now, Guts' party mirrors not just his crew from back in the day, but also that of the Skull Knight from back in his day. We say this because we've already seen Casca compare Isidro to Judo, and Skull Knight himself compared Guts and Schierke's relationship to the one he shared with Flora. The thing is, both those groups ended up dying horrible deaths. And if time and causality do work in a spiral, then at least some members of the Black Swordsman party are literally destined to die in gruesome fashion. We also don't know exactly how they will be involved in the final battle now that Guts is sinking into the depths of despair and seemingly rejected all help. It will be very interesting and probably very depressing to see the ultimate fate of the Black Swordsman party, but not as interesting and depressing as number 15. The ultimate purpose of the Moonlight Boy. The Moonlight Boy, aka that time of the month Griffith literally loses control over himself, is one of the most important entities in all of Berserk, and he's never spoken a single word. The child that Guts and Casca conceived and was later corrupted into becoming a demon by Femto's violation of the latter has been with us just as long as Puck has, but it was clear that Miura didn't have a direction for him back then. The demon child almost seemed like a representative of the God Hand, taunting Guts by telling him he could never escape from demon kind and giving him trippy nightmares post-torture and stuff. But as Berserk has continued to unfold, that kid's life has become increasingly horrifying, and it all peaked when he was absorbed into the vessel that eventually incarnated Femto into the physical world as Griffith. The characters in the story realized that the Moonlight Boy was Griffith fairly recently, but that mystery wasn't quite a mystery to begin with. During the reunion on the Hill of Swords, we were explicitly told by Griffith himself that the reason why his body moved to protect Casca was because of residual feelings left over from the child in his vessel. The Moonlight Boy clearly has influence over the Falcon of Light's movements, and this is why Griffith kidnapped Casca from Elfhelm and brought her to Falconia with him. But the real mystery is just what is supposed to be the Moonlight Boy's ultimate purpose. We get that he's a great way to nerf the overpowered Griffith, and that the uncontrollable transformation of his means it makes Griffith vulnerable, but the Moonlight Boy is extremely powerful himself. Don't forget that this is the same kid that kept Casca alive throughout the incarnation ceremony, and was able to tell off a Pishacha Ghana with a single look. He's also saved Guts on 2 occasions with his astral body when he can't even physically speak words. All this to say that killing this kid won't be as simple as some people think, if that's why he's in the story in the first place. And death for the Moonlight Boy isn't exactly a new theory either. Upon his birth, Skull Knight proclaimed him to be a cursed child who should be killed before he can grow into a threat for the world. So technically speaking, the foreshadowing has been there since chapter 92. But this is Berserk, and we can't believe things will be that straightforward. We agree that death is a part of the Moonlight Boy's natural story arc, but there is more to his involvement in the story than we've been told. And if chapter 372 opens up in Falconia in a couple weeks' time, we want this question to be answered before anything else. Marvelous verdict. And that's our list. After 4 months of complete radio silence from Studio Gaga, Berserk's return has finally been announced as Chapter 372 drops on April 28th. Hopefully we'll get some answers to some of the questions we've brought up in this video, but until that day comes, let us know your favorite Berserk mysteries in the comments section down below. As always, if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, be safe out there, and have a marvelous day.